What's up, mathletes? This is section 3.5, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So let's solve these equations by taking the square root of both sides, the square root property. So here, what we can do is we're going to undo the subtraction with addition. We're going to get this. We're going to undo the square with a radical, taking the square root of both sides. We get x is equal to plus or minus 7. And you can write the solutions like that if you want. Here, taking the square root of both sides, to undo the square, you get plus or minus 6 and put them in curly brackets in a set. 81 is equal to r squared. Take the square root of both sides. You get plus or minus 9 is equal to r. That's plus or minus the curly brackets right there. Plus or minus 9. Undo the subtraction with addition, and then undo the square with square root. You get plus or minus 10 is equal to t. Both positive 10 and negative 10 would work as solutions to end this inequality in this equation. So, fun review, there it is. Now, we're going to do the same thing by taking the square root of both sides with the square root property, but it's not a perfect square at the outset. What we've got to do is use what we learned in the last class to use those formulas. This is a perfect square trinomial. We got if a were equal to x and b were equal to 2, because it was the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of x squared is equal to x, and if you multiply them and double it, you get 2x doubled as 4x, and that's what the middle term is. Yay! So we get x minus 2 squared, going from this term to this, this equation to this equation. We're using that formula that we talked about, making sure that we choose a to equal x and b to equal 2. So this is a minus b, or x minus 2 squared is equal to 25. And now we can take the square root of both sides because they're both perfect squares. Yay! We get x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 5. That's awesome. Now undo the subtraction with addition, and you get x is equal to positive 2 plus 5, positive 2 minus 5. And if you actually do the addition and the subtraction, you get 2 plus 5 is 7, and 2 minus 5 is negative 3. Whew! All right. Now we're cooking. We can do something more interesting than we could before. We got this looks like a perfect square trinomial because I got a perfect square here and a perfect square here. I wonder if the middle term checks out. If we choose b to be 10 and a to be x, then 10x doubled is 20x. Yes, it is. There it is. So the formula says we can say a plus b squared. Taking the square root of both sides, we get x plus 10 is equal to plus or minus 8. Now subtracting 10 from both sides to undo the addition, we get x is equal to negative 10 plus 8 and negative 10 minus 8. When you do those additions and subtractions, you get these two numbers. And both of these numbers work as solutions in the original equation. You can check that if you want. 9x squared minus 12x plus 4 is equal to 25. Smells like a perfect square trinomial to me, because 9x squared is, take the square root of that, you get 3x as the a value. The b value would be 2. You take the square root, and if you multiply the two together, you get 6x. Double it, you get 12x. Boom. You can use the formula 3x minus 2, because a is 3x and b is 2. We want to make sure you use subtraction here, because this is a minus 12x. So it's squared, you get 3x minus 2 squared is equal to 25. Taking the square root of both sides, you get 3x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 5. Adding 2 to both sides and dividing by 3, see 2 plus 5 is 7, divided by 3 is 7/3. 2 minus 5 is negative 3, divided by 3 is negative 1. And that's how you get that. Oh my Lanta, these are some huge numbers. All right, so we got 361. It's the square root of that is 19. I have that memorized. Do you? Yikes. That's a really large number to have memorized. But if you x squared, a is equal to x, because the square root of x squared is x, and square root of 369 is 19. 19 times x doubled is 38x, so we can use the perfect square trinomial formula. X minus 19 squared is equal to 576. Take the square root of both sides, you get the square root of 576 is 24. It's plus or minus over here, and it's x minus 19 is equal to plus or minus 24. Adding 19 to both sides, you get that. And 19 plus 24 is 43. 19 minus 24 is negative 5. Awesome. Boom. Solved by taking the square root of both sides. We're just going to keep on rocking and rolling. The difference is now we're going to get numbers that are not perfect squares. A equals x plus b equals 9 equals 12. I'm doing that because the square root of 144 is 12. The square root of x squared is x, and the middle term checks out, because when you multiply 12 times x and double it, you get 24x. Yay! That means this is going to be a plus b squared is equal to 192. You take the square root of both sides, and actually 192 is not a perfect square. It's just going to be plus or minus the square root of positive 192. Negative 192 is coming next. But we've got some awesome radical techniques that we know how to simplify these square roots. Square root of 192. The largest perfect square factor of 192 is 64. 64 times 3 is 192. And 64 is also a perfect square. The square root of 64 is 8. And so we can write this plus or minus 8 root 3. Oh my gosh, so many different skills all coming together in the same equation. Undoing the addition with subtraction, you get x is equal to negative 12 plus or minus 8 root 3. And you could, if you wanted to, you could get a decimal answer. Like if this were a physics class and you wanted to know, you wanted a decimal answer, then that's that. But you could also just write negative 12 plus 8 root 3 as your first Alex answer, and your second Alex answer would be negative 12 minus 8 root 3. I'm just going to leave them like that, because that's a good way to communicate the answers. All right, is this a perfect square trinomial? I think it is, because 36x squared, what times itself is 36x squared? It's 6x. What times itself is 1? It's 1. So the a value is 36x and b value is 1. Does the middle term check out? 6x times 1 is 6x, doubled is 12x. Yay! So this is a plus b squared is equal to 18. Take the square root of both sides, you get 6x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus square root of 18. And now the square root of 18 is, we have to check to see if there are perfect square factors to simplify the radical. And there are. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 is a perfect square. You can take that perfect square, you get 3. And then, so this becomes plus or minus 3 root 2. So I got to subtract 1 from both sides. You get negative 1 plus or minus 8 root 3. And then divide both sides by 6. You get this. Now, if you wanted to, you could type it, you could get a decimal with your calculator, or if Alex is requiring you to type out 2 separate answers in the exact form, then you could say it's negative 1 plus 8 root 3 over 6, or negative 1 minus 8 root 3 over 6. I'm going to leave it like that because I can. Because I'm a teacher. I can do whatever I want. I can't do whatever I want. All right, so let's see. Is this a perfect square trinomial? Yes, it is. 25x squared is, the square root of that is 5x. The square root of 16 is 4. And so when you multiply them together, you get 20x, and double it, you get 40x. So we can use the formula. Yay. 25x minus 4. This is, I need to fix this. All right, there it is, fixed. We get a minus b is 5x minus 4 squared. You take the square root of both sides, you get 5x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus square root of 28. And wait a minute, 28 has got a perfect square factor. You can find 4 on that list of perfect squares, and 4 is also multiplies up to 28. You can also take the square root of 4, so that's 2. This is going to be 5x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 2 root 2. And when you add 4 and you divide by 5, you get 4 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 5. Excuse me. It's always good to also check the greatest common factor. If all of these is 1. Sometimes it's larger than 1, and you'd have to divide all the terms on both sides by that. I wanted to let you know right now that my favorite hobby is rock climbing. I love it. It's so much fun. Maybe you've done some rock climbing at a birthday party at a gym. My favorite kind of climbing is outside with ropes and harnesses and stuff. It's great. Tell me your favorite hobby when you get into class. Solve by taking the square root of both sides. We're going to have to divide by a greatest common factor first. Here, these are all even numbers. Divide by 2, and things get a little simpler. It's a bit easier to spot that we got a perfect square factor if you divide by 2. So 529, to take the square root of that, is 23. This becomes a is x, b is 23, and when you multiply 23 times x and double it, you get 46x. So a is x, b is 23, and you get x minus 23 squared is equal to negative 72. Take the square root of both sides, you get that. And then negative 72. The square root of negative 72, wow, it's got you can factor out a negative 1. You can also factor out a 36, and you're left with 2. So this is going to be 6. The square root of 36 is 6. The square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 2 cannot be changed. So we're going to add 23 to both sides. We get 23 plus or minus 6I root 2. It's all coming together, people. It's all coming together. There's so many different skills from so many different lessons all converging here, and I want you to stick with me if it's tough, but it's kind of exciting for me because we've been working really hard, and now we can solve some really, really complex equations with lots of different techniques. 2x squared minus 20x plus 50 equals negative 128. Wait a minute, they're all even. Divide by 2 first, we get x squared plus minus 10x plus 25 is equal to negative 64. Now, you wouldn't have seen, if we had not divided by 2, then we wouldn't have seen that this number is not a perfect square, but this number is. And so now we recognize we can use the perfect square trinomial. X squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to negative 64. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of x squared is x. 5 times x doubled is 10x. So let's use that formula. X minus 5 squared is equal to negative 64. Oh, negative square. We're going to take the square root of both sides. We're going to get a negative square root. Oh, it's okay. We know how to do that. We've got eyes all over the place. These notes are crawling with eyes. Add 5 to both sides. You're going to get 5 plus or minus 8i. All right, here we go. I can see that red dot coming, so be ready for it. 16 is a perfect square. X squared is a perfect square if you let a equals x and b equal 4. So this would be x minus 4 squared is equal to negative 36. And when you take the square root of both sides, you get x minus 4 is plus or minus the square root of negative 36. You can factor out that negative 1. It just becomes 6i. And then x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 6i. I wonder what's underneath that red dot. Maybe you can tell me on the Edpuzzle questions. If you x blank plus or minus 6i. Wait a minute, all these are even. Why is the greatest common factor only 2? Maybe I should have chosen something else. Sometimes it's larger than 2, sometimes it's 5. You have to divide all the terms on both sides by the greatest common factor, and you get this. Now it's a lot easier to see that we've actually got a perfect square trinomial formula we can use. 9 and 3. When you take the square root of 9, you get 3. Take the square root of 4x squared, you get 2x. And then so this would be a minus b because we want to make sure we incorporate this subtraction here. 2x minus 3 squared is equal to negative 4. Take the square root of both sides, add, eventually we get 2i. Add 3 and divide by 2, you get 3 plus 2i, 3 minus 2i, both over 2. Wow, let's do some word problems. Yes, knowns and unknowns, baby. There we go. All right, free fall. A rock falls from the top of a cliff that is 25.8 meters high. Use the formula, and I hope we're getting used to this formula a bit more. Negative 1/2 gt squared plus vt plus h of 0, where gravity is at this strength. If we were on the moon or we were on Jupiter, we would use vastly different values for g because the strength of gravity is different in those locations. But on Earth, it's always going to be 9.8 meters per second squared. To write a quadratic function that models the situation, determine in the nearest tenth of a second the amount of time it takes the rock to strike the ground. Explain your reasoning. I'm going to explain it through math. We got knowns, the rock falls, and so that it says rock falls, right? Where does it say? Oh yeah, in the very first 3 words, a rock falls. So that means it's not being thrown down, it's not being thrown up, it's just being simply dropped. That means the initial velocity is 0 meters per second. And we want to know what t is when h of t is equal to 0. So let's see, the cliff is 25 point, that's really high up. H of 0 is 25.8 meters. G is 9.8. So we're going to plug those things in, and we're left with just t squared here and t here. All right, so we get 0 is equal to negative 4.9 t squared. The linear middle term drops out. It's 0. We don't have to write anymore. Plus 25 25.8. I'm going to add the quadratic term to both sides, so we get positive 4.9 t squared is equal to 25.8. Let's divide both sides by 4.9 and take the square root. We get that t is going to be plus or minus 2.3 seconds. But there's this physics problem. So technically, if you wanted to, you could start at the very bottom. No, I'm not gonna talk about that. I'm just gonna say that the negative value doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but the positive value does. So in the context of this word problem, you can just say it's 2.3 seconds, rounding to the nearest tenth of a second. Investments. The amount of money A in an account in which P dollars are invested for 2 years is given by the formula A is equal to P times 1 plus R squared. The 2 years is right here. If it were 3 years, we'd see a 3 in the exponent, or for 10 years, a 10 in the exponent. But we're just going to say it's in there for 2 years. Now, R is the interest rate compounded annually. If you start out with $800 in the account and it grows to $882 in 2 years, what was the interest rate in the first? What was the interest rate to the nearest percent? So we know we start with a principal amount of 800, and then the final amount is 882. Plug them both in right here. You get 882 is 800. I'm going to divide both sides by 800 so that actually the motivation for doing all of these is we're undoing operations. I see R, and then I see an addition, and then I see exponent, and then I see multiplication. So I'm going to undo them in reverse order. I'm going to undo the multiplication first with division. I'm going to undo the exponent next with a radical. I'm going to undo the addition next with subtraction, and that's how I get R is equal to square root of 882 over 800 minus 1. You could plug all that into a calculator, and you get 0.05. That means it's 5% interest. And y'all, that is the end of our video. Take care. Be good to yourself. Thanks for playing along. Thanks for watching. I will see you in class tomorrow, and we're going to get to work. See ya.